Welcome back to another episode of the Wildcast podcast. And this is actually our second iteration of Wildcaster Live. This is our new multi-streamed opportunity for you to interact with us here at the Daily Star, our reporters, as well as the coverage we're providing you through the Star, Tucson.com, and the Wildcaster, both through our audio podcasts, which you've normally been able to listen to us through at Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and now in video form at Tucson.com. And we'll get it out to you through social media too. I'm Brett Fera, sports editor of the Daily Star, here with Bruce Pascoe, our longtime Arizona men's basketball beat writer for the Star and Tucson.com. And we are coming to you on Friday. It's a little afternoon here in Tucson, about 11:20-ish as we record this in the Willamette Valley, where Bruce is stationed after last night's last-second buzzer beater by Jordan Pope of Oregon State to send the Beavers to an 83-80 win over the then, I guess still for the next couple of days, number 9 Arizona Wildcats men's basketball team in Corvallis in their last scheduled trip as Pac-12 members to Gill Coliseum. Bruce, there's a lot to potentially unpack, but there's maybe not a lot. It was just one of those nights where we feel like we've seen this before, right? Whether it's Stanford, whether it's Washington State, and now Oregon State, it's please, sir, may I have another, it feels like, for this team in some of these last go-round road trips for the Pac-12 slate this year.
Yeah, and I feel like Gill Coliseum is probably as much as any place where they've really had a lot of just tricky games over the years and losses. And I think a lot has to do with, it's always hard to play conference road games. There's no question, but then Gill is is this old building and it's never full. It's just not a lot of energy. It's you're walking up an old cement staircase with about to hit your head on piping overhead to get to the court. It's just a weird place. It's neat, but it's a weird place. And then the other thing is, if you believe in this, and I have seen it a lot over the years where they've got a big game against Oregon, or they play at Oregon State after playing a big game in Oregon, and neither is really great for to keep your mentality consistent. And so there's been a number of times they've come into Oregon State, and this was a perfect example this week. And I don't think necessarily Arizona was looking ahead, but perfect example this week where they've got a game on Saturday against Oregon is potentially for first place, and then they got to play Oregon State first, and Oregon State's in last. Guess what? Oregon State wins. That kind of scenario has happened several times before. They've lost 5 of their last 13 in Corvallis, and a lot of those weren't 2 great teams. And so, it's one of those deals. It is always hard to play on the road. It's a cliche, but it is true.
I know we've seen this. We've seen this for decades with this program. It's gone through multiple head coaches, starting back to Lute, through Sean Miller and through Tommy Lloyd. But is a part of it also that when these teams that aren't great, so this year, Oregon State, Washington State, Stanford, but have pieces. I mean, we're talking about a finite difference between the top and the bottom. Like, yes, the top team in the conference is going to win 13 or 14 games. The bottom team's going to only win 4 or 5, but it is tight. There's some parity, at least in the sense that all these teams have good players. Jordan Pope, great player. We know that before last night, let alone what he was able to do yesterday. So my point in bringing all that up is, are we still playing by the same rules that every one of these teams playing Arizona is the biggest game of the year for them? I mean, it matters that much, especially on their home court. And that,
no, absolutely.
Tommy Lloyd's not going to use that as an excuse, but at the same time, like, there is no reprieve. And so I guess I bring that up to ask, should U of A basketball fans think the wheels are falling off, or is it just this is this year's version of UConn losing 6 of 8 in January, or Kansas losing 4 of 6 when they won the title a couple of years ago? And not that Arizona's going to win the title, but just being hyper competitive, a number 1, 2, or 3 seed, all the things that are expected out of this program.
Yeah, you said it. That's all 100% true. And it is the biggest game. I think Keyshawn Johnson, the player they brought out last night, basically told me the same thing. This is what we get. We wear that block A on our chest, and people are going to come at us and have great games. And he just kind of tipped his cap to Jordan Pope. It's like, I think they weren't even really upset about Pope just because he's a great player. He hit some great shots. I think they were upset about some of the other things they gave up, especially Oregon State's bigs. But it's their biggest game of the year. Oregon State was 1-6 in conference. They're generally a better team. 2 years ago, they only won 3 games. Last year they were a little better. This year they're a little better than that, but they didn't look like it because they had lost 5 in a row, but the truth was 4 of those games are on the road. The other was a home game to Stanford. They lost in overtime. So they had the pieces, and they've got good bigs, and they've got a really all conference type of guard and Pope. So it's not a surprise that those guys are going to be pretty competitive, and they're going to be 100% what they can do in a game like this. And that's what they were. They hit on all cylinders last night, and Arizona clearly didn't.
I know you're still working today. Walk us through what your day like is today between games on a trip like this. Like, you have the game that's late last night in Corvallis. Arizona time ended 11-ish, which means you're working till 2-3 a.m. Arizona time, an hour earlier on the Pacific Coast. The Saturday game in Eugene is at 3:30 Arizona time, so 2:30 local. So you don't have a ton of time in between, but you got to produce a couple stories for us. Kind of walk through what your day's like today. You're still doing some final scouting report touches up on your Oregon coverage, from what I gather, and what I gather meaning what you told me before we went live, and kind of how does it work today for you on these trips to get ahead, to be ready for seeing what Arizona can do tomorrow?
Yeah, well, the Friday turnaround especially after a late Thursday game, that's the toughest part of this job, really. But because last night again, I was up till about 3 Pacific, about 4 a.m. working and driving down to Eugene.
I was going to say, you're staying in Eugene, right? So that's what, 40 minutes or so from Corvallis?
Yeah, 45 minutes or so. Yeah, and trying to find something that's still open besides truck stops on the way down. And there are truck stops in the Pac-12, by the way. But anyway, no, Friday sometimes can get really tricky, especially if there's travel in between, or if there's press conferences, or some teams make guys available. Oregon does not on Friday, and Arizona does not. So actually, it's easier in that sense. It's not as good because I can't get any new information except from maybe the scout, whoever's scouting for Arizona, which is Ricky Foyce this time. But for the most part, I'm just sitting here going over what I had last night, trying to rewatch a little bit of the game, and then come up with a couple of stories. Hopefully not too late for you.
As everybody knows, I'm not hiding from it anymore. Our deadlines for print are a little bit different than they were a decade ago or even 2 years ago. So Bruce and Justin Spears, Michael Lev, PJ Brown, Greg Hansen, our entire crew are always hearing from me about, hey, we gotta get those stories in and done. But so I'm not going to keep Bruce too long on this. But part of this, and I'm glad you were able to share a little bit of that, is part of why we're doing this with these video packages, and we want to make this a audio and video simulcast, so to speak. Is we want to do a little more of answering our readers' requests to learn a little bit more about what the process is like to do the coverage that's so great that you guys do. And, Bruce, we talked about this yesterday. You were at actually, I didn't talk to you about it. I talked to your old boss. I asked Ryan Finley this question yesterday. We were talking about you. I said, how long has Bruce been on the Arizona men's basketball beat? And I know you hate talking about this, so I'm sorry if I'm throwing a cog in that, but it's
date myself. Yeah.
But it's been long enough to understand that, these types of swings this month happen, and it doesn't necessarily mean the sky is falling. We'll see if it continues this weekend at Oregon tomorrow, Saturday, 3:30 Arizona time. I was actually just looking up to see what channel it's on. Do you know off the top of your head? Is it Pac-12 again?
I haven't even looked.
It's Fox. It's on Fox.
Yeah,
at 3:30 at Matthew.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It's their afternoon window. No, I think and the one thing about that, Brett, is I think this is actually one thing that I think, in a way, that fans, certainly me, might miss when they leave the Pac-12 is this thing where you have these Pac-12 weekends where you play 2 games in 3 days. Is very unique, and it really is in college basketball. There's a couple other places that do it, and Arizona might get a couple of these in the Big 12 where they're sent out to maybe Texas to play a couple of different games,
TCU and Oklahoma State or something,
something like that. But every weekend it's like this. So you have the situation where you can lose 2 games and it feels like the end of the world for the team. And then the next week you come home, play 2, and everything feels normal. And it's really something else. And it's going away. This is basically they've got Colorado and Utah left. They'll still have those kind of trips in the Big 12, but this in LA, it's really the last time they'll be doing this. So even if they lose Saturday, and there's a very good chance they will, it's going to knock them out of the top 10 for sure. But it's not going to knock them out of the tournament, and it's not even going to knock them completely out of the race if they get their act together the rest of the way. So it's just, it's one of those things, though. In the moment, these double road trips can really be tough on a team.
looking ahead to Saturday, less so about Oregon, more about Arizona. Is there any, I know it's been discussed a lot by fans, by pundits, by people trying to talk on social media. Is there anything about the possibility of seeing some roster maneuvering here? You know, whether it's Kylan Boswell moving around a little bit to make more room for Jaden Bradley, whether it's, figuring out what to do with Umar Ballo, or is it just, that's just the nature, is that these are two important pieces of an 8-man rotation, and they're just not they're not at their best, for lack of a better word, right now, but this team needs them to be, so they got to keep playing them.
I keep asking Tommy Lloyd that every now and then, and he keeps saying he wants to give more time to Krivas and Philip Borovichinen, and that's happened a little bit from time to time, but I don't think neither of those guys got in the game last night. And he hasn't changed the starting lineup. I had thought if he might at all, it would be Bradley for Boswell, but he seems to really like to start with the same guys. He did start Bradley in the second half last week to try and mix it up that way. I don't know. So far, he seems to want to go with the same guys, and then within that, maybe give guys a little more here or there, and that's probably what we'll see continue. But if some bad trends continue, maybe you could see him switching some things up. I mean, you could even see things like, I think probably maybe is likely, just guessing off the top of my head, would be maybe you don't start Umar Ballo if it's a smaller lineup you're facing, and you have stretch 4 or 5s, because that was a big problem last night. And maybe start Johnson at the 5 and go with a smaller lineup, and then you put Bradley and Boswell in there together. I don't know, but that's one thing I've kind of wondered about. But again, I think he likes the look they have. Certainly against Oregon and Nafali Dante, you got to think Ballo will be in there. But maybe it would be interesting to see if maybe situationally, depending on who they're facing, if they do tweak a little more.
All right, I thought that was the last question. I do want to ask one more. It dawned on me because I was talking to our colleague Justin Spears about this today, that, last trip to Oregon, I know you've been kind of doing this, Pac-12 eulogy every single week that they're on the road and when they're in the last time in a stadium, and you got some great shots in Corvallis last night. You did it in the Bay Area back in December and over the New Year, and then in Washington at Washington State a couple of weeks ago. But Eugene's a little interesting because over the last decade, UCLA obviously huge, ASU obviously huge for historical cultural reasons on these campuses in Arizona, but Oregon has really been a pretty solid rival to Arizona over the last 10-12 years. Yeah. And we go back to, Justin pointed this out, man, you remember you were up there for the craziness after Sean Miller had to basically, not had to, but pulled himself out for a game essentially, and dealing with all of that, the DeAndre Ayton aftermath of that. There's been a lot. I don't know how much of it was at Matthew Knight Arena in Eugene, but there's definitely been enough amongst these two teams at all 3 locations, meaning Eugene, Tucson, and Las Vegas, that there's been a pretty good history between these clubs.
Oh, it's terrific. Yeah. I mean, you could say, like, in the Pac-12 era, probably UCLA is probably the team that fans get most excited about, rival. And I think a lot of that has to do with geography and, U of A students being from LA, growing up, whatever. But certainly over the periods of time, Stanford and then Oregon, I've been and really huge rivals. And I think you're right. The Oregon games, the Pac-12 tournament games have been terrific. They've had, a lot of games up here, and then, a couple of games at McHale. I remember, I think Oregon won 5-6 in a row.
Well, they broke the 49 game home winning streak. And
if
I remember right, I was at that game in the stands. It was a blowout at halftime, and it was late and it was a long work day. And so my wife and I looked at it and we're like, you know what? Let's just head home, and we go home. In Arizona, actually, if I remember right, made it a game. I think it only ended up being like an 8-point differential, if I'm not conflating 2 different games. But nevertheless, there are games that maybe don't have most memorable moments, but that still had big impact on both of these teams too.
Yeah, and I can remember both Sean Miller and Tommy Lloyd being just throwing their hands up after games at Oregon when they just got hammered. And with Lloyd, that was last year. And, Miller a couple different times, honestly. And then there was a game when Miller wasn't there, which was 2018, that game that Miller sat out. And I think we did a series on this last summer. And I think it was I put it number one as far as the games that I remember the most. I mean, there's been so many great games, it's hard, but that was just so memorable because of the situation and DeAndre Ayton going completely ballistic, and just having this monster game. It goes overtime. There's white powder on the floor. There's people waving $100,000 candy bars at Ayton. I mean, it's just insane. And then, before that, you go way back. And then
I don't remember the candy bars. Were they like the $100,000?
Well, they had them on a sign. They had them on a sign.
Oh my gosh, I don't even remember that part. I remember all the rest.
Yeah,
it was Matthew Knight Arena is a beautiful building. I've gotten to see it once in person. You've been many times. Obviously, a change from Matt Court. In your time covering this team, again, you told me not to age you or date you, but we'll go back a little bit ways. But Matt Court, obviously, lots of memories in terms of just what its place in college basketball was. But from a standpoint of ambiance, my guess is Matt Court was amazing, but my guess is Matthew Knight Arena is a little easier to work in.
Oh my God, yeah, no, Matt Court was terrific. I mean, it was like Gill Coliseum squished together. Like it was just like you're on top of the court. You're literally on top of the court because the media they
went vertical.
It just goes up, and there's and the acoustics are such that it got super loud, and they're even with only 8,000 people or whatever it could hold, and it was insane. But they put us in the first row, and overhang. They were just kind of like squeezing this in, and you have fans knees would be in your back. And
hey, we know it. We experienced that back in December in Raleigh, North Carolina. Or no, wait, December.
Yeah, it was a little. Yeah, it was a lot like that. Yeah.
The knees in the back, people spitting on you because they're so close to our. I'm like looking up, and someone's like hands are doing this over my head.
Yeah, although I'd say that kind of like those Duke fans, the Oregon fans are actually really nice. They're not mean. They don't they don't give you a hard time if they know you're an opposing media from somewhere else or whatever. They're pretty cool. I had good conversations with some of them over the years, but yeah, no, Matt Knight Arena, you're sitting up in the corner. It's kind of like it is today. You're sitting up in the corner on a big table. It's nice and comfortable, but your viewing is not good. And, you have to use binoculars, and frankly, fans at home sometimes can see the games a lot better than we can. It's just, but we are there for what it's worth. But yeah. And again, it is a nice building. It's fun to walk around. The murals they've done, some of the design elements, really cool all the way around.
Am I wrong?
In fact, to speak of the unique Pac-12 weekends, one thing they have is the Bill Walton Sports Illustrated cover where it says the Lost Weekend. There was a famous weekend. I don't remember what season it was. One of UCLA's they were unbeaten, I think, at the time, and they come up to Oregon, lose both games. And they had a picture there, and Walt was in the cover, I think, when they lost at Oregon, and he even refers to it as the lost weekend. So it was a thing back then. It's still a thing now.
One of the coolest parts, and I never got to go to Matt Court for a game, but if I'm not mistaken, it was many years ago. But if I'm not mistaken, Matt Court's still up. It still exists, and it's part of their PE and rec program, and it's usable. Yeah. People can rent it out for classes, and it's really cool that they managed to keep it in. I mean, I guess Arizona did it with Bear Down Gym, which is great too. So, and evolve it into something that's usable space. So kind of neat that the history is still there in some capacity.
Yeah, I actually went there. My daughter was touring colleges, and all the locker rooms and stuff had been repurposed, and other athletic offices were used for the rest of the school was and they actually did a presentation in one of them for students and stuff, and it was crazy. And I kept looking at her, telling her about all these memories I had at Matt Court, and she's looking at me like, "What the hell are you talking about?" But no, it was really cool that they kept it, and I think I think it was kind of a no-brainer as long as it structurally is sound, which it still is. Just because it is such an amazing building, they just they don't make them like that anymore, and haven't for a long time.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for joining me today on the Wildcast podcast and Wildcaster Live as we evolve into this new iteration of multi-platform conversations and interaction with our readers. Like I said, our readers have let us know. We did some surveys last year, and people said, if we can't necessarily get you tickets to these high-priced sporting events, what more could we do for you to bring you close to the action? And they said we want more from Bruce and the rest of the crew. So I appreciate you being willing to let me pick your brain about these road trips and stuff. It's fun.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And then, I get emails from time to time. Sometimes it takes me a day or two to get back to people, but that's always that's always fun too. And then, you know, I'm not so much on Twitter mentions and stuff, but email and whatever, or through us would be great. Yeah.
Well, thanks, Bruce. Bruce Pascoe, Arizona men's basketball beat writer for the Arizona Daily Star, Tucson.com, and the Wildcaster. Thanks for listening. If you are listening to us, remember to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And if you are watching us, stay tuned for our next episode of Wildcaster Live. You can find it at Tucson.com and at the Wildcaster on X, formerly known as Twitter. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.